Francis, you got 30 million rand behind you on the wall. And do you know what? I know that the South African Weather Service asked Treasury for 30 million rand to upgrade their systems. Could that be the number of the day?
It's not. And remember, one man also was expecting a pension payout of 30 million, which puts it in perspective. The whole Weather Service. Brian Malefe is that man, and of course it didn't come off. And he is not linked to the number of the day. Well, not directly, because Transnet is, and he is the one-time CEO of Transnet. But let's get to this. Pressure is mounting on global consulting firm McKinsey's now to explain if it knew the destination of payments that were channeled out of consulting fees to companies it partnered with. The investigative journalism unit Amabhungane says it can show that 30 million rand flowed from the state-owned rail and freight company Transnet through a consulting firm that worked with McKinsey's called Regiments to shell companies associated with the Guptas. So it's a bit of a complicated link, but you have to follow the money. This was for work done on a project to increase Transnet's freight business. It is feared that the money that landed up in the shell companies eventually may have been used to pay so-called commissions or bribes to secure state work. The journalist unit, Amabhungane, has published another section of its dossier on McKinsey, focusing on these dealings with Transnet. In a statement released last week regarding its work with Eskom, McKinsey admitted it was not careful enough in assessing its association with Trillion, which is a consultancy house linked to the Guptas. Now the focus is on the previous work it did before Eskom, work it did for Transnet in association with Regiments, which is also linked to a Gupta associate. Salim Essa, a Gupta associate, is the connection between these smaller companies, Regiments and Trillion. He joined forces with Regiments director Eric Wood to create the rival firm Trillion. McKinsey says it didn't know that Essa controlled most of Trillion when it was working with Trillion at Eskom. The question now is, how much did McKinsey know about the payments made from Regiments after Transnet contracts? Well, let's break this down. We're joined by Sam Sol from Amabhungane. He's on the line for us from Durban. Good evening to you, Sam. And just in a nutshell, what was fishy about the payments made from Regiments?
Okay, Francis, you've delivered a really fantastic summary of our 4,000 word story. I couldn't have done it better myself. I think what's fishy is that we discovered from internal documents from Regiments itself that in this particular one contract with Transnet, where they were 50-50 partners with McKinsey, more than half of the money that was being paid by Transnet to Regiments was going out to so-called business development partners, who, from what we can see, that appears to be a euphemism of people who procured the work. In other words, if Transnet spent 200 rand, 100 went to McKinsey, and of the 100 that went to Regiments paid out 55 rand. They only kept 45 rand to these business development partners who secured them the work. So the scale of these commissions really makes it ridiculous to suggest that they're merely normal commissions that somebody selling a house, like somebody an agent selling a house might get. And, we asked McKinsey repeatedly whether they were aware of the fact that Regiments was paying out these enormous sums on the contracts where they were partners. And 6 times they declined to answer that question. They maintained they didn't pay, they'd had nothing to do with Salim Essa, who seems to be the rainmaker in this whole affair. But they wouldn't say what they did know. And this is part of the problem with the way McKinsey has dealt with this crisis is they've been very circumspect about what they have disclosed.
Let's just talk about what's wrong with these commissions. Is there any concern that these commissions ultimately landed up in the pockets of any SOE officials, state officials, or were their hands clean and this was just for the people sort of wheeling and dealing to get the work?
Look, what we show is that a couple of the companies, 2 or 3 of the companies which received these sort of the 50% part of these commissions were essentially shell companies that we can link to the Guptas directly or indirectly via Salim Essa. And we know from other instances involving Transnet specifically and the purchase of locomotives that Essa, as an agent or as a lieutenant for the Guptas, inserted himself in contracts, received huge commissions from the Chinese purely for securing them the business. And there's no way in which that size of commission can be kind of paid innocently. So we don't know to what extent any of that money may have flowed on. But what we do know is that, for instance, Anoj Singh, who was at the time of these payments, I think still at Transnet, or at least for part of the time, he enjoyed the hospitality of the Guptas in Dubai. The Guptas had a kind of a modus operandi of having influence over the decision-making structures in these state-owned enterprises. So the question is, this money was paid out. We don't know how the influence was brought to bear, but we can certainly say that this money was paid for influence to be brought to bear.
And ultimately, taxpayers would be paying because the price of the contracts themselves are inflated. McKinsey itself, how much trouble is it in? Because it's not directly linked to this. It is saying it didn't know what its local partners were doing exactly. Are you just saying that that's unbelievable?
Yes, look, I think part of the problem is for us, McKinsey is not answering questions. And that in itself raises doubts about their bona fide. To some extent, one can understand because, as we point out in the article, Corruption Watch has laid criminal charges, is attempting to have the company investigated in the United States. In terms of the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, these things might have criminal consequences. So we could understand if the company said, there are potential criminal consequences from this. Because of that, we can't answer. But they try to have it both ways. They try to say, mea culpa, we made some errors of judgment, but more or less, we didn't do anything wrong. Whereas the evidence that we put forward today suggests that there are a lot more serious questions that they needed to answer if they were going to make a clean breast of things.
Sam, in finality, just make this very simple for South Africans who can't read all these documents, all these claims and keep up. Somebody spoke about development fees being for wining and dining, but state officials are not really allowed to be wined and dined and make decisions on that basis. Is that what we're basically talking about?
Absolutely. We're talking about influence peddling. And what the Constitution and the Public Finance Management Act makes clear is that state institutions, whatever happens in the private sector and people's golf games and weekends away, the state is supposed to make decisions based on what's best for in terms of delivery on bang for the taxpayer's buck. And when that changes, it is essentially, every South African who loses, not only the taxpayers, but the people who are supposed to benefit from the goods and services procured by the state, because inevitably the decisions get skewed and corrupted.
All right, Sam Sol from Amabhungane doing sterling investigative work. Thank you for that update. And we mentioned him earlier in relation to the number of the day. Well, the former Transnet and the former Eskom CEO, Brian Molefe, has had to pay back